So I'm Bob Bakert with Jazz Guitar Today. We're here with DJ Sparr, and DJ is a composer. He's an instrumentalist, a soloist, and I mean that's not really giving you your full due. I mean, if you go to Wikipedia and see everything that you're involved in, and from writing one-act operas, which blows me away. But mostly what we want to talk to DJ about is he's expanding the role of electric guitar in the world, and I think that's really, really important. Back last year, 2019, he was the guitarist, the soloist on a Grammy award-winning endeavor from the London Symphony and Joanne Falletta and Ken Fuchs. And the title of that project was what, DJ?
Well, I mean, the piece is called Glacier. The electric guitar concerto is called Glacier, and then the album is named after the piano concerto. Glacier was the electric guitar concerto that Kenneth Fuchs wrote, and then he asked me to record it.
And you all were awarded a Grammy for that.
Yeah, it came under Best Classical Compendium. It won Best Classical Compendium.
Well, that blows me away. And how I got to you is through Joanne Falletta, who was the musical director and conductor of the Buffalo Philharmonic. And also, I think she's the first female to get a conducting degree from Juilliard. I think that's one of her accolades. I could be wrong about that, but somebody reminded me of that just the other night. So the exciting thing about this is that you're not the first guy to play electric guitar with a symphony. When I say electric guitar, we're talking about rock and roll tone electric guitar. You play a Paul Reed Smith, pedal boards, effects, the whole 9 yards. We're not talking about, a classical guitar or Andre Segovia with the London Symphony.
Right. Yeah, that's
full on what we all grew up with, electric guitar, distortion, overdrive, reverbs, the whole 9 yards. And now Yngwie Malmsteen has done that, as many people have seen that, but he's playing, to my knowledge, he's always played known pieces, and he sort of took over like the violin space, if you will.
Yeah, I think he's playing violin concertos or classical pieces, and there's lots of fun things you can watch online.
Yeah. Of it. Phenomenal stuff, but nothing. It's not really moving the instrument forward in terms of being accepted as an instrument of its own in the orchestral environment.
Yeah,
so
that's a new thing. Yeah.
Very exciting. So you and maybe a couple of other people on the planet are doing this, isn't that correct?
Yeah. So one of my role models is a fellow named Stephen Mackey, and he's a professor at Princeton, so he's got a fantastic job. He grew up as a rocker and actually went into composing music, written out music, pretty late in life. By most people's standards, I think he was in like 21 or 22.
Right.
And then, people like him, there's a couple people like that. Next thing you know, you're teaching at Princeton and you're making records with San Francisco Symphony, playing electric guitar. And so what he does is there are rock licks and things like that, but it's pretty user-friendly and accessible.
Right.
But it's highly composed concert classical music.
Are your solo? When do you get a chance to improvise in any of this, or?
I do, yeah. So, and I've played Stephen Mackey's piece. He did one that he played with Bill Frisell, and I forget the drummer's name, but they played it. So he gives a lot of room for them to improvise in that piece. And if you look at one of my pieces that I've composed, it might look like a big band chart actually. Like you have things you play, and there's spaces where you solo, and then I now do things where the orchestra can vamp certain textures, and then I can solo, and then I can look at the conductor and give him the neck move, and then we move on to the next vamp, so the orchestra can still mutate behind the solo, and I might write something like, this is the mode that you solo in. And in the Kenneth Fuchs piece, there are spots like that as well. It will say improvise in this mode, and then do it softly, and then orchestra might do it, and then he's like, say, do it loudly. But it's not a lot in his, he's, thoughtful composer. His piece probably, 20% is improvised maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe less. But there, it's fun if you're people like us that have done that. I mean, we know, you play the head, and then you play the thing, and then you go back. It's fun. It's not so far off. So
it's not far. It's not far removed from what most jazz players do. You play the head. Let's say even if you don't play the head, let's say there's a singer.
Exactly. Yeah.
He or she will sing and the tune, and then there's room for a solo. I mean, it blows me away. I mean, in a really, really good way, that's what's going on, because the orchestra and the Philharmonic orchestras have always been, you know, just kind of those guys, you know.
Well, I mean, I think what gives me and I'll pass this along, the thing that helps is to know the etiquette of the rehearsals. So, like, I went to Baltimore School for the Arts as a jazz guitar major, and so right off the bat in high school, also singing in a chorus at School for the Arts, we would go sing with the Baltimore Symphony. So I've been in the spot where, like, you show up and you have to be ready to go. There is no such thing as like, hey, let's take a break and go get a sandwich and then come back when you want. I mean, the orchestra people have a clock, you know, and the clock is like, when the clock hits 9 o'clock at night, if that's when the rehearsal's over, on the minute it's over. But they all come ready to play, so you don't need the extra time generally. Right. And then, so as a person that was in that situation, it also grew up playing, you know, the 8th grade dance, Guns N' Roses stuff, and Van Halen. It all smushed together for me. And now I'm married to an orchestral violist who's been the head of violist of orchestras and also is a professor of viola. So I get to run by, you know, my world that I live in is kind of a classical world, and I'm out in the rock and roll garage here, you know.
So how did a guy go to jazz school and decide to become involved in the whole classical world?
Well, what happened was I always wrote music. So from a young age, my parents found me a guitar teacher when I was in kindergarten, Brad Malinowski at what was called Christie's Music in Westminster, Maryland. Now it's Coffey's Music. So even when I was a little kid and I learned a new chord, I would always I just thought writing music went along with playing guitar. I think it's very different than the other instruments. Like my wife's job is to execute someone else's music at a high level, but the guitar world is like in 4th grade, my friend carried a snare drum up our driveway and we jammed in our living room, and we were always writing and inventing. So when I went to Baltimore School for the Arts, and then you hear these classical instruments, the desire to like have them in like, you know, the quote unquote band, then how do you communicate with them? You have to write stuff down. So, and then we were taking theory classes, and I started composing 4-part guitar things that I recorded on a Fostex X26, so 1990s.
I know what you mean.
So I was doing like my own versions of like homework, but like for fun, and recording at home. And then I went to a music camp that had classical instruments a couple years in a row. And then I used that music to apply for college. And then I went as the composition major. You
studied jazz guitar or you studied composition?
I did jazz guitar at Baltimore School for the Arts in high school, but then once I went
to
high
school, okay.
Yeah, our undergrad, I was a composing major with a guitar minor.
That's coming together.
And then I went to all the degrees for composing. I wanted to know everything there was to know about it. So
right. So you have a doctorate. Isn't that correct?
In music composition. Yeah.
A doctorate in tube screamer overdrives and
well,
Marshall amplifiers.
Yeah, I will say that in Michigan, I went to University of Michigan, and all of the composers that were the professors there were also performers. So that they weren't people that gave up performing. So right. That was really encouraged. They said this is going to be something that they were good at, not specifically me, but helping each person be unique to themselves.
Sure.
And,
now, let me just jump along a little bit. So Ted Ludwig has become a real good friend of jazz guitar today. And so there's 6 degrees of separation here. So you composed a concerto. Now, did you compose it for Ted, or did Ted was the?
No.
How did that happen? Because
it could be played by whoever wants to play it, but that was specific to Ted. Literally, I asked him what kinds of ways he thinks when he solos, what kind of chords he uses when he comps, and I used some of that material, not so much like the actual chord progressions, but the voicings and things are in the orchestra, so that when he is integrated into the orchestra, it's all very related. And I thought that came through the Arkansas Symphony, where he has a gig at the fanciest hotel in Little Rock.
Yeah.
So I went and listened many times, and before Zoom, we did a Skype.
Right.
And I recorded the Skype, and I did use chord progressions loosely of giant steps, because to me that's you can hang with giant steps. So my joke is I can hang with giant steps if I have 5 months to write the piece and it takes 15 minutes to play it through 3 times. So very slow.
it's
Yes.
one of those pieces. I think I've learned it, played it 6 or 7 times over the years, and forgotten it. And
Oh, Ted's like this. When I go, he goes, what are you doing? He's like, when
yeah,
these folks gonna do, and I was like, okay, no, that was a great piece. I mean, my thought was like, what would an orchestral composer? Some of my favorites are from Eastern Europe, and they're like Catholic, mystical composers, minimalist composers. And I was like, what would a composer like that do with someone with Ted's skill set? You know, like
wow.
what a fun treat. And that one I would say, have 80% improvisation. So that's more like chord changes over the slashes in the part, with
Right.
every now and then you join in with written out music.
Yeah, I listened to it. You know, I just became aware of it just like yesterday, the day before, and I listened to it in its entirety yesterday, which was a real treat. So I don't want to keep you too long. I just wanted to talk about Joanne Falletta and how all that came to be, Ken Fuchs and all of that.
Yeah. Well, Kenneth Fuchs went to Juilliard with Joanne Falletta, and they have a long relationship going back to the days as grad students, I think. And so he has also a relationship with the London Symphony, where they make records, and they do it at Abbey Road Studios. And Ken was writing this piece, and I was aware that he was writing this piece for electric guitar and orchestra, which he wrote for an orchestra in Montana, because he's a good researcher. So he had reached out to me, and I'm happy to pass along all of my music and any other pieces that I know about. And so he was studying up on it, and I was thinking like, man, I mean, we've all had this feeling, right? I'm like, I want to get the phone call to do this thing. Like, what's going on? But he, a great person, premiered it, his colleague at University of Connecticut. But then when it came time to record it, Ken asked me, and we got to play it with an orchestra in Florida and go over and work with Joanne, and that's how that came to be. And I have to say, he's one of the nicest men, and she's one of the nicest collaborators I've ever worked with. And it has been, I mean, it's a dream project, right? I mean, to live as an artist on earth is a treat in itself, but then to get a phone call where like, you can go make a record with the London Symphony, and it's an Abbey Road studio. I mean, that's not, I never dreamed that one up. So that one was really cool. And just so people know, I mean, I was nervous. I mean, I'm the first person to walk on stage with, like, as Steve I would say, like, your guitar god only feeds off one thing, and that's confidence. Like, I can do that. But the first hour at 8:30 in the morning in Europe, UK time, playing in front of the London Symphony, my fingers were really cold. They were really, really cold. And then I went into the producer, and I'm like, listen, you got to talk me down. Do your thing. Like, he's like, you got this. We're not even recording yet. They're ready to go. And then the way Joanne we started making music, and when we went in, then things were firing on all cylinders, and we knocked it out. That was a 4-hour recording session.
I find that in my own world that if I don't get nervous before I do something, then what's the point of it? And usually, as soon as the first downbeat happens, I'm okay. I'm home. I'm good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
What
I do is, my guitar teacher, Steve Yankee in Baltimore, Maryland, he told me, when you practice, imagine being at the concert. Don't not think like this whole thing where like people are naked or this and that, other. Forget it. Like I've drawn pictures of myself playing, or if I'm gonna go play a certain venue, I'll go online and try to find what it looks like from the stage, and I just like hang that on the wall, and I'm always thinking like, this is in front of the crowd while I'm practicing.
Well, if you don't have a little bit of butterflies, I think then that takes some of the fun out of it. Being scared to death is something completely different. But
I think there's like adrenaline junkies that jump out of airplanes, and then there are people that go play big shows, right? It's all.
There you go. It's all what gets you going. Well, I got another question for you. Joanne, I interviewed Joanne, and she said that when you first started to play, that the sound of the electric guitar that you had was something they had never heard before. The musicians in the orchestra, it was like, it blew them away. So I'm going to ask you, what was your chain? What was your sound chain? What effects did you have? What pedals did you use?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So there's the one thing I started with was Paul Reed Smith. Was 1989 model.
Yeah.
I did have, and at this point I was living in Lubbock, Texas, and I'd known about Lindy Fralin pickups, and I knew they were more musically expressive, and I played guitars with them. And at that time I thought, well, for this recording session, this guitar would really work with that kind of pickup. And so I had them put in like literally I picked up the guitar like almost on the way to the airport. It was that, in my memory, it was like that crazy. And then what I have a setup within I have a stomp. I got this thing here. It's this GCX audio switcher, and I have an Eventide Eclipse V4, and then I have a pedal board. So what I can do with that is with the audio switcher, I can run the 4 pedals that I use. I use a Boss octave pedal. I have a MXR flanger phaser, the Eddie Van Halen one. And then
you have the old MXR flanger, the one that plugs in?
I have the yellow one. It's like, yeah, it's and then a green. Oh, I have a pedal. Stand by. A DJ that's organized today. So the super octave, Boss super octave. This old Boss delay thing, which is really cool because you can like.
Is that a DD2 or 3? What is that?
DM3.
DM3.
I like a little bit of compression. I think the setting is I just looked up the fellow from Dire Straits.
Mark Knopfler.
Yeah, just his setting, whatever the YouTube people, and then the Phase 90 MXR.
Old school.
Yeah, now that's going through this switcher. So I don't have them necessarily on the floor by me. What's on the floor by me is a boudoir wah-wah pedal, an Ernie Ball volume pedal, and then just the pedal board. And then on the Eclipse, I have some more advanced settings. And what I can do with the second volume pedal is I can go from a dry sound to a affected sound with not unlike what an organ player can do, like the organ feel, you can.
Right.
And then also I'm really into the volume pedal in terms of making the guitar sing and do like what a bow would do on a string. I do a lot of fade-ins with my right foot. And then that went in that situation to an amp that no one knows what it's called. There's an orange amp, not Orange the brand, but like just an orange colored amp in the Abbey Road studio that they brought out that someone just gave them like years ago. And I wrote them later, like, what is that thing? They're like, we don't know. Like someone just gave it to us. So that was one channel. And then what I always rent when I play with orchestras, a Vox AC30, clean, and it doesn't make a lot of noise and stuff. So, and then I have a little.
You played through the Vox AC30 that's at Abbey Road?
Yeah, that one was one channel, and the orange was the other channel.
You know who's played through that AC30?
Probably the most amazing people.
Everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was the one. Yeah. So
that's very famous. I'm sure it's probably the same one that's been there since the Beatles were there.
Oh, well, I'm glad I didn't. That's probably why my fingers were cold. I knew that.
Glad you didn't blow up. They would have rebuilt it. That's amazing. That's really all I had for you today, and I appreciate your time.
Oh, absolutely.
What's amazing is we're talking about pedal boards and swells and octave pedals and all that. And I'm not talking to a rock musician who's playing, who's playing a gig, with whatever it is. We're playing to someone who's playing with symphony orchestras and composing and all that. And I got to tell you, for a guy, it's me. I've been playing guitar since before 1960. Okay. Yeah. And, to see where the guitar has come all these years and to see you doing what you're doing is very exciting to me. And I appreciate your time. Everybody speaks very highly of you. And if you don't mind, we're going to come back and visit with you at another time to feature more of your specific music and what you're into and what you're doing. So
happy to be of service, whatever you need.
Bob Bakert saying goodbye with DJ Sparr. We appreciate you, DJ. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for doing this, man.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.